On this week's show, Saheel from PingCx and Matt from Fred Williams joined Ping and I to talk about life after commissioning. And we're talking about what it takes to keep an OT network healthy over the long haul, early warning signs, documentation, and whether predictive maintenance really measures up to the hype. I'm Ryan LaFlamme, and this is How to Handshake, Episode 2. I'd like to thank Saheel and Matt for joining Ping and I today. And I guess first things first, I'd just like to give you guys a chance to say hello, tell us who you are and who you work for. And I'll start with you, Saheel.
That's great. So my name is Saheel Chandrani. I'm the co-founder and CEO for a company called PingCx. We are a autonomous commissioning solution for building automation systems. Been on the market for about 2 years. The software's been around for a little while longer, but been in the controls world for most of my career. So coming up on 20 years in the industry. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Miller. I am a controls specialist for a MEP group. It is called Fred Williams. It's a smaller part of a large company called Equans. I am part of a controls startup branch in the Boston. So I'm doing a lot of sales and other things, or trying to learn how to do sales is probably a better way for me to say that. I have done controls for about 15 years, but it's largely been out in the field as a technician. So a lot of my experience is in mechanical rooms. And thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
100%. Ping, we know you. Everybody's got a different perspective here. We've got the hands-on. We've got the approaches from commissioning automation points of view, and that's great because our discussion today is about commissioning, and in particular, all of the work that happens after commissioning. And we know from a lot of people, this is the point where they kind of drop off. But for a lot of people, including I think the people around the room here, it's where a lot of the work just starts. So I'm going to start. First of all, we'll go around the room and just to talk about early warning signs. I think this is one of the things that perhaps doesn't get addressed a lot immediately after commissioning. But, what are some of the first indicators that you look for when a BACnet network is starting to look like it's degrading? Are these obvious signs, or are these signs that, you couldn't blame people for missing? Let's start with that, and then I'll go around to Ping and then Saheel.
So I think most of them can be somewhat easy to find. There are degradation things that are harder to find, but what I look for is the facilities operators overrides. A lot of times I see something will be commissioned, it has been checked, okay, this should run in auto, and as soon as either the contract work or the commissioning is complete, the owner operators will go and override things. So if you go and you override a damper, then that program in that controller is never doing what it was built and designed to do. So what I look for, excuse me, is overrides, communication, bus health, things like that.
Over to you, Ping. What do we usually see from our side?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we are lucky when we get the chance to work with these buildings, with these users. We do have the benefit of being able to see what's inside the network. So I'm going to make the assumption that we get to look at the traffic, right? Whether you're using optical visual networks or you have a PCAP file from Wireshark, that's what we will look at. And the two signs I normally look for, like the early signs, is anything slow down. And people always ask how to quantify it. I'll tell you, if it's an IP to IP controller, anything over 100 milliseconds, it's too slow. And when you do go through a BACnet router, so let's now add a BACnet MSTP, anything over half a second, so 500 milliseconds, it's an early sign, or actually not an early sign, it's actually a sign of a degradation. And then the second one will be drop packets. So requests that don't have acknowledgements, requests that don't have responses. That's a pretty easy one. And then below that layer would be now looking at things like devices that don't respond at all. So in optical vision networks, we'll talk about unreachable devices, but that typically means that something was changed, something was decommissioned, something was removed, and the database or some programming was not updated. So those would be the top two signs would be slowness and drop packets. And then after that would be to start looking at stale databases, call them.
Stale databases, slow, dropped packets, overrides. What do you think?
That one. Yeah.
What are the obvious ones that you usually see?
Yeah. From our perspective, our platform automates a lot of the workflow. So for example, Matt, he is physically articulating devices as he's doing his commissioning. In Ping's example, he will be the first person to notice when there are slowdowns in communication, right? So I've set my override. Did I get the acknowledgement? Is the system responding as quickly as it should? That Ping shared a very clear metric that it's a trackable speed degradation that you're noticing. From our perspective, it's a piece that the software will flag, that we know that there is a certain, on the top end, we have a timeout period that after a certain amount of time and we don't see good communications between devices, that we know that let's pause this exercise and fix some network issue. But for the most part, when we start seeing speed concerns, especially as we're waiting for feedback from the system, for us, that's usually the first sign of trouble.
I guess, and obviously this is a related question, I guess, a follow-up. How would you distinguish these between signs that we're seeing devices that are actually failing versus misconfigurations or configuration drift?
For honestly, devices failing, I'm not expecting a device to fail within a couple of years. So if there's a problem,
a few years, yeah.
That's not my first angle to try to troubleshoot the issue. That would be along the last of the issues. Now, if it's a network that has older devices, and if it was an existing network, then yeah, I would take a look at it. But if it's a new building or just maybe it was a retrofit and you have new devices, then device failure is rare. But at the controller level, I would say device failure is probably not it. It's probably a misconfiguration. I've seen things where maybe new work was added on, so maybe maybe there was a change and some additional devices were implemented and it wasn't part of the main scope.
I would just add to what Ryan said there. You agree, hardware failure quite rare. I mean, in our 10 years analyzing network, I think I've only heard of 2 cases of actual hardware failure where like a network card actually died. And we're talking about, again, in that 10 years time range. However, the one exception I will say is equipment that's connected or physically installed on something that vibrates. So motors, fans, anything that vibrates, the connector, the terminal screws, the cable on it can cause some issue. Old school controller where you actually had a physical resistor, they can come loose a little bit. It can cause noise.
That's true.
Let's talk about after commissioning. When you're inheriting a building's OT after or giving it back after commissioning, what are the first things that you want to understand or that you want other people, perhaps the contractors, the people you will be giving it back? What are some of the first things that you want them to understand when you're doing the commissioning process?
I'll start and let these guys who have a lot more experience chime in. But what I will say, the only thing I've seen is that unfortunately commissioning is a stage prior to use of the building. And just like what Ryan said earlier, as soon as they start using the building, they start changing overrides, schedules, things like that unfortunately were not in place prior to commissioning. So many times these buildings at commissioning are empty. And then post-commissioning, people move in, things get moved in, and then things don't operate the way it was designed. And so therefore they start changing. And that's unfortunate. And I think that's why the continuous commissioning and all this stuff that these fancy terms you can bring to forward. But commissioning is a point in time, and the before and after, the physical use of the building is very often extremely different.
The perspective of having to commission your OT network is its own sub-discipline in the commissioning scope of work as a whole. Now, from our perspective, we develop tools that let controls contractors be better and faster at the commissioning process. And so from our perspective, we are so reliant on both the in-construction or temporary network, and then depending on the type of building, size, scale of building. Now, the interconnectivity between devices, of course, is not changing, but the custodians of these networks are changing. The responsible parties are changing. And so from our perspective, it's always really helpful that the new custodians do their own diligence process. They have now inherited, like you said, Ping, they've inherited the system. And before the buildings team goes wild, new trade partners, new subcontractors come onto the scene, and they start going wild on this network, adding, removing, modifying devices, that this baseline condition report, that snapshot in time, is what's referenced back to. That as I do a recommissioning exercise in a regular cadence, what should ideal look like? And so if this is the delivered state of my system, my BMS system, and therefore the network that supports it, what has rightfully been added to the system, and how can I bring it back to that ideal design state? And I think that that's where the combination or the interdependence of both of our technologies really lets a building owner, the final custodians of these networks, truly diagnose and maintain peak operating health of their networks.
I just wanted to drill down on something you mentioned very quickly there, Saheel. You mentioned I think you called it a construction or a temporary network. And this could just be me. I'm not familiar with this. Are you saying that in a lot of these commissioning jobs, you'll establish a sort of standby or temporary network until things are complete? Can you just expand on that a little?
Yeah, and again, it really does depend on the ultimate end use of that building or the vertical. So larger, more complex buildings, complex systems will certainly have network infrastructure between control devices or control panels, that these are temporary in-construction networks that are owned, maintained, and for the pretty much exclusive use of the MSI or the controls contractor. So in this case, a lot of the core building infrastructure that will exist in perpetuity, those systems are also in construction. And so if a controls contractor does not want to be dependent on another trade or their project schedule, I'll stand up my own network. I'll stand up my own interconnections that, yes, from my sensor on the wall to my controller in a panel, obviously that's not going to change, but between panels, can I sit on the corporate network, or do I need to stand up my own network? And many times, and Matt would be the perfect person to be able to speak to this, but these in construction networks, sometimes, carry forward or exist into the project's life. Many times they're wound down and sort of decommissioned. Right?
Yes, absolutely. I've done that myself, because as the controls contractor, we have a deadline. So our deadline is a part of everybody else's deadline on a construction project, but I can't wait for IT to have all of their stuff before I can do my job. So at times I've set up a temporary network. In some cases, I've just strung a Cat5 from, device to device.
I guess one final question I wanted to ask about a little bit about commissioning or post-commissioning just in general, I guess, is if there is sort of one, I suppose you could call it one myth or one major misconception about the commissioning process or the post-commissioning process that you wish that people just had a sort of basic or better understanding of when they start to engage with you or engage in this process, Saheel, what would you say?
For a long time, well, let's start with the fact that commissioning generally has been a voluntary exercise. It is industry best practice, and for the most part today, it's standard practice. Everybody does commissioning. But the idea that commissioning begins after a certain point in time, or we have to have certain substantial completion before we begin commissioning, that is a myth in my opinion. That there are many commissioning scope items that are done by the individual trades. And so while formal documented commissioning for the purposes of verifying a deliverable to an end user, that might be a snapshot in time, but the commissioning process is a lot longer. Starts right in the design phase. Your owner's operating requirements, your OPR document, is that guide, is that guide stone, is that guidebook where all trades are essentially, not only are they expecting to live by certain deliverables, but these are none of the activities or none of the scope items of commissioning are surprises to the trades further along. So commissioning doesn't start after, the last few bricks have been laid. Commissioning actually starts in the design phase.
And that's, I think, an important point that you make. And Matt, I'm sure you've seen that too, is
completely with Saheel. And I'm not sure how much of my last response before I lost connection there, but the temporary network thing, my answer was I have done it myself because of the deliverables. I have a job to do. I cannot wait on IT or the corporate network to be complete. I need to do my job. So I need to go ahead and do, a lot of times it's whatever you can. But back to the commissioning starts sooner, and it does start at every individual trade level. So that is definitely, I agree 100% with Saheel's point.
Ping, I would love your perspective on that. Do you think that the commissioning, when we start as early as possible, that should also include the IT teams who oftentimes, come in towards the end?
Yeah, great question, Ryan. That was actually my burning question I had for you guys. Saheel, Matt, to my knowledge, commissioning of communication network, OT network communication, it does not really exist. Am I correct? I mean, some talk about it, but truthfully, commissioning is functionality.
It's functionality. It's adherence to design specifications. But again, that OPR document is not a spec document, right? So the spec document lists every single finite quantifiable detail about construction. The OPR is, I intend for this site to work a certain way. And generally, that's what you're verifying. So yes, I'm verifying that my contractual deliverables been met. Yes, they have, or no, they haven't. Have I achieved the design intent of a project? From my perspective, so much of the building's systems are dependent on a high quality, highly functioning network that without the right infrastructure, you just have a bunch of desperate systems throughout the building sort of doing their own thing. And there isn't an OPR document that I've ever seen that says, that's good. I would be okay with a bunch of systems sort of doing their own thing in their own little finite space, that they are, the design vision here is a building that is orchestrated, that works, in conjunction with itself. And so giving both the IT and the OT networks the right diligence during the commissioning phase is a very important element of the process.
And what do you think that requirement or that request would come down from the owner, from the engineering team, from definitely not system integrators?
System integrators are very motivated. So let me not say that they don't care. They're certainly very motivated to deliver a very high quality project. Yeah. The owners, I think there's a small subset today and an increasing subset of the owner community that is sophisticated enough to ask the right questions. But for the most part, I would look at the design community to say, here's a benchmark for good, and here's certain KPIs or certain deliverables you should expect if you want to make sure you're getting the best of the best, or at least what you specified.
Thank you. So I'm curious. Ryan.
Yeah, go ahead.
How often? I'm not talking about continuous commissioning. I'm talking about forced recommissioning. And I'm not saying that
forced recommissioning. Yeah.
Right. I'm not talking about, okay, you failed commissioning, you got to tweak some stuff, you come back. I'm saying months, years after the system has drifted or not operating to the intent, and the owner, or by law sometimes, forces a new commissioning stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does exist, and thank you for asking. Certain municipalities, geographies have local laws or local policies that dictate a periodic recommissioning of your building. Let's talk specifically New York City. New York City, which is my home city, has Local Law 87. Local Law 87 says a lot of things. One of it is every 10 years you must recommission your building. And so today, many consulting engineering firms that do some commissioning. This is a very young practice in their companies, but it's one that's growing very rapidly, because when you apply this rule to buildings that are over 25,000 square feet, in New York City, that's very many buildings that now every 10 years have to go through a systematic recommissioning of their facility. And so then you look at cities like Boston and Denver and Washington, D.C., that these policies or policy-driven need for recommissioning or periodic recommissioning is very much there. It's a very achievable thing. And then you layer on, it's time for a selfish plug, you layer on some automation solutions, the idea of taking what would be a month-long scope of work and then executing that in a couple of days by leveraging automation. It's a very achievable ask that the municipality makes.
And that's a perfect segue for me. Forgive me if it's is kind of starting to sound like a broken record, but we all know that terms like predictive maintenance, proactive health are very much terms du jour. I'm just going to fire through a couple of these questions, and I'm just very curious what your feedback might be. So first one here, predictive maintenance. It gets a lot of attention in industrial OT contexts, but also, we carry that over to commercial, to healthcare, to data processing centers, all of these large footprinted buildings. How much of predictive maintenance, actually, do you think actually translates to these smart buildings, and where does that sort of start to show some cracks or show some strain?
I'll just preface by saying predictive maintenance it's hype because it takes work to achieve a system that is able to flag true concerns and not just pollute alarms with false alarms. And part of why we feel that this chaos is introduced on the front end is you're applying predictive maintenance or analytics software to systems, as Ping suggested earlier. After a few years, there is just natural drift and degradation. And so applying a really intelligent piece of software on a system that is just naturally drifted, you're essentially going to find a lot of noise. So to answer your question, I don't think it's hype. I think there's real benefit to predictive maintenance, but that a thorough recommissioning of a BMS or building systems is an important prerequisite. That if you were to apply an analytics package or let's say deploy predictive maintenance directly after construction, your odds of success with that software are so much higher. We see a lot of benefit. And I think that as systems start to improve over time and as owners start to improve in their operational capabilities, these technologies will continue to add value.
Right. And I suppose the follow-up to that is layering on these things. Who does that fall to be a responsibility after handoff takes place, for example, back to the building? Who in the building would typically take care of this? Is it facilities? Would it be IT? What kind of tooling, staff capacity do they need to even make these a realistic or, like you said, an effective part of your tool set?
Historically, it has been facilities, it has been engineering, and those teams, of course, are still very responsible for some of this scope. But as I'm sure you've also noticed, today's facilities management team is not just one stakeholder, right? It's not just facilities or engineering. It includes people from IT, OT. It includes people from sustainability. It includes people from finance. It includes people from the core business, right? And so to that end, historically, system integrators have inherited this responsibility that we've got an air conditioning system and it was not the most sophisticated piece of technology. And as a result, the system integrator or the controls contractor was just by default responsible for the operational health of that system. And as we've seen these roles mature and these end users mature, today, I would say from our perspective, sustainability drives a lot of the decision making. Again, all the stakeholders are still present in the decision making chain, but I think we've seen some pretty meaningful evolution in who's making these decisions and the urgency or the importance that maintenance as a topic or operational health of a system or networks. It's a much broader stakeholder set that's responsible for this today.
Yeah. I was going to just add, Ryan, again, this is for me as an outsider, but of course we do get the chance to work with a lot of organizations, service providers who are adding FDD, predictive maintenance, proactive maintenance, whatever you want to call it. And what I've seen is it does require a level of desire, and the ownership group, let's call it, has to incentivize that work to happen. I think we are in an industry where everyone has too much to do. And now you're adding on top of these things that, because by nature is proactive or predictive, the problem has not occurred. I have a list of things that are problematic that has occurred. Should I put time in things that aren't a problem yet? Or should I work on things that are problematic? We need to incentivize that proactiveness and reward to spend time on something that hasn't broken. And then the other thing is that a lot of it occurs on schedule. So you don't need a lot of software for schedule. You just need a calendar. Now you add software, it does require a level of training, skills, investment into the human resource to have to learn how to read these alerts. Even if there's only one, you have to learn how to read it and devise a ticket, a work order, and work on something, again, that has not broken yet. So I think it's tremendous value. I think that's the future of our industry, but we need to change as an industry. We need to reward investing in something that is somewhat transparent, right? With that ROI being significantly higher because it didn't break.
A valid point.
It's, forgive me, Ryan, it is such a valid point that you make. And also I think about availability of technology. We've been such big fans of Optigo. I personally have been fans for years, that the availability of this technology for the owner community, where the ease of use, the intuitiveness to deploy, to really be able to self-manage some of this, was also not, again, if you look 10, 20, 30 years ago, these tools were just not, they had the same problems, maybe a less intelligent layer, but the core fundamental operational issues in the building haven't really changed. They just didn't have the availability or accessibility to certain key technologies that today they have, and they can be enabled or incentivized to be more proactive.
This question was something that came along in our last discussion, the idea of the network health score. It is sort of the one number that he can use when he's talking with the building owners, the facility managers, who may not, be deep in the woods when it comes to BACnet and have a complete understanding of every diagnostic result, nor should they. When you need to communicate with people like facilities directors, what does good look like for them, and how do you show that to them when you
Great organizations think alike. So likewise, we also issue a health score, a building health score, right? Or a system health score. And the idea is exactly as you've articulated, that there are many elements to what makes something function or not. And there's quite a lot of gray area. And just because something may pass a commissioning test, or just, you may ultimately deliver 68-degree air to a space, doesn't necessarily mean that everything behind, between the fan and the room is operating the way it should. So it's a meaningful metric. The other perspective I'd love to add, and I'm sure the gentleman from Ellis Don would reiterate, that as you provide services to your end user, and so in this example, I'm thinking of myself as a system integrator. I have a service contract with an owner. I go throughout the year providing and performing services. The net benefit to the owner is, yes, my systems are working and I don't have as many complaints as I would have had I not engaged a service provider. There is still this element, or there's still this dimension where even though they have shown up, they've done their work, systems are working, they get put in this uncomfortable place where they have to prove the work they've done, because now it's time for a renewal of a contract, or it's time to expand services on a contract. And that health score, whether a network health score or a building health score, it's such a deliverable that you can say, when we started the year, we were at X, and we have either kept it at X or improved. And here's what we've done to keep your building at that operating condition or improved it. And that subjectivity around, did they do what they said they would, or did they show up? I like the guy, just don't know what he did while he was here. Like, all of that variability goes away, because we have now very clearly articulated what value we've added over the course of the year.
I'm sure you're very aligned. Obviously, you're a big fan of the network health score. Yeah. What is your perspective on that?
I mean, we say all the time, network health score, it's not a commissioning or post-commissioning specific topic, but you and I, Ryan, we've talked about so many times how the network is a foundation that we build everything on, right? So as Saheel mentioned there, we often go into, there are often cases where there's a temporary network during construction phase, and then that network gets ripped out, or gets added, or gets changed, or gets connected differently. So, and the network health can impact every aspect of the system. It's not particularly a commissioning topic, but the network health should be observed from the start all the way through. I would love to see where commissioning, and that's why we were going into that true commissioning report. What did you call it, Saheel? The OP?
The owner's operating requirements, or the owner's performance requirements, is a document at the front end of commissioning, which is sort of the guidebook for the whole process going forward.
Yeah. I would like to see that include, it doesn't have to be complex, a perspective on the network side, the amount of broadcast, the directionality of the traffic, the response time, right? The delay that is expected or supported or allowed, the number of IP addresses, maximum per subnet. Like there's enough IT expertise in the world that we could bring a little in here to add, and it just will make our buildings better.
Yeah. And that's that's a really good, I guess, again, a nice segue to the next question about sort of documentation. And I wanted to ask you, and feel free, both of you, to chime in here. What roles does network documentation play in long-term health? As somebody who came from a bit of the IT side before, we always used to push the idea of centralized documentation that everybody can see, so that we're not making this stuff up and it's not changing week to week because somebody can't find, the list of IDs or MAC addresses. So how often do you find that documentation is either missing, wrong, or was never updated after the initial commissioning that happens?
100% of the time.
Yeah.
But it's just short and to the point.
Yeah. I don't know if that answer really needs more detail. I mean, it's so true, right? It's so true that, and again, I don't think it comes from a place of malice. I think it just comes from a place of the speed at which things happen in a building, the lack, and when I say lack of organization, again, it seems like an indictment on somebody, but it's you look at the average large owner, right? The average owner with a large building, which means they're somewhat complex environments to begin with. The construction department is different than the facilities department. The procurement is trying to achieve their objectives. And so, 3, 5, 10, 15 years into the operational life of a building, you've got scenarios where procurement's had their way, and so they end up buying technology a certain way, which means you get trade contractors that bring their own chaos to the building. So whether you could try to control this as much as possible, the reality is that there's just so many different things going on at different paces in these buildings, that just a lack of organization and a lack of documentation and a lack of hygiene around this is not, you can see that you can't avoid it.
No, I think hygiene's a good term to use too. It's one of those things you have to keep doing it. And unfortunately, it's one of those things, is usually one of the most common issues, right? When you find, there might be configuration drift. Oh, there might be, what's changed over time. And oftentimes they find one of the first questions should be, well, where's your documentation? And have you been keeping up with it? And then the answer is almost always no.
I want to come back to your earlier point about the network health. There is a point around commissioning where network health is important. And I think commissioning is taken as a snapshot in time that you can trust, and then drifts from there. I think often you can refer back to that. So even if commissioning just included the Optigo health score or equivalence, right? This is the number of packets we found. I think being able to kind of come back years later. And yes, the system has changed, but it's only drifted by 8%. It's drifted by 300%. Could, I think, help through the discussion of the journey of the buildings very often. So that's one part I would love to see become a standard.
And maybe it's just it's a little seed for us to collaborate a little bit more. That 100%. It seems very feasible to incorporate this in the standard deliverable package.
That's right.
I think that is a perfect place to leave the discussion, gentlemen, today. Again, apologies to Matt, who had to drop out with some communication issues. I will, for people watching, I'll try and reconnect with Matt and see if we can't get his answers to a couple of these questions, and I'll pend it right after this interview. Just finishing off here, Saheel, where can people find you online?
PingCx.com. We love the name Ping, so we wanted to use it ourselves. So PingCx.com.
That's great. We're gonna have to get lots of merch for Ping.
Yes.
Happy to share. I feel like I'm a bit of a t-shirt dealer myself. That's been a little bit of our standard deliverable that we've been taking to trade shows. So we'll set some aside for you both.
Perfect. We'll get you a life-size cutout of Ping you can put in your booth.
There you go.
Excellent. So much. Thank you so much, Saheel, and thank you again, Ping.
Thank you all.
Yeah. No, thanks.
We are back with Matt. Unfortunately, Matt had some connection issues from the road, but we were able to get him back. And I wanted to pick up with Matt on the last couple of questions that we finished up with Saheel. And Matt, these were kind of like quick fire questions. And we're calling this segment the predictive maintenance reality check versus hype. Predictive maintenance gets a lot of attention in industrial OT contexts, but how much of that do you think actually translates into smart buildings? And where does the idea of predictive maintenance fall apart for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's in its early stages, but I'm a believer. So when I set something up to be optimal, I'm thinking, okay, I want your piece of equipment to run optimally so that you can save money. And for us out in the field, we can also say, hey, look, if we can program your piece of equipment and make sure we can commission it and make sure that it's running optimally, you can get these incentives from your electrical company or your utility provider. So that's an angle that we currently do.
Mm-hmm.
These guys basically, after the building's already been commissioned, they monitor and they trend a lot of things, and they apply like trending of weather.
You said they're including weather. They're including weather forecasts as part of the predictions.
Right.
For preventative maintenance.
Right. So say I go in and I commission something and I say, okay, well, your unit's running optimally, and let's just use your economizer. So you're bringing in, free cooling because the outdoor air in your building, everything meets that criteria to use free cooling. So you don't need to use DX or a chiller for this unit at this time because everything's meeting the requirements. So we can go and do that and we can have something running, but then, my program's not going to change until, say, that dew point or something gets like way, basically a little too late. But these guys are looking at it to say, hey, well, if we implemented sort of like a little bit ahead, they're trying to get ahead of the curve with sort of some of those elements. So they can tell the building owner, they can make recommendations and they can make suggestions. We suggest that you program your equipment this way or that way. Then they would call us and say, hey, can you guys do this? And for us, we're like, yeah, give us the sequence of operations that you have, and we would love the work. So we could come physically, on site, do it. I think it's a little bit early, but I'm a believer.
Well, that's good. And that was going to be my next question is, what do you think a building operator needs to have in place, or what do you generally recommend maybe in terms of data quality or staff capacity or anything like that before predictive maintenance of an OT network is perhaps even a realistic goal for people? So if they were, say, just starting from zero.
So they would definitely need, a good network, a lot. I think these guys, they take trends over the course of years. So data needs to be there.
Right.
So you have to have all those trending points. You have to have a reliable system where, that you're going to save those trends. You don't want to lose it, because if you lose that data, then you kind of.
So yeah, that would be, for you, would be step one is having the data, capturing the data. And then from there.
Yeah, most definitely.
And I mean, it's the same thing that Saheel had also mentioned. Without a high performing or good OT network as your base, you can't even start layering things like these on.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
kind of trending programs or anything capturing your data if you don't even know if the data is clean or working, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So I guess not just data, but verified data.
Yeah.
So, because if somebody sends me some data, and I'm like, well, you could, get a huge chunk of savings here. But if I show up and, I'm like, well, this is the data that I was given is,
Mhm.
maybe a different piece of equipment. Who knows? So
Yeah.
you would definitely need the network and the capabilities of holding and not losing any of that data or having it corrupted at all. But you would also need to have it verified. So it's got to be accurate. So you would have to have somebody to continually checking the data.
And that's, yeah. When you give back, we'll call it giving back a building after your commissioning project is done, who is typically responsible for that and that long-term sort of network health in a high rise or healthcare? And in your experience, who is usually assuming control for those after you're done? And, in your experience, are those people typically equipped to do this? Or is this something else that's just lacking?
Yeah. For the most part, no.
Mm.
It is a mixed bag. So the people who own that, I mean, when we do a project, we'll say, okay, well, we warranty our work for a year. So, any service call, it's on us because, we warranty our work. But who owns it is, if you want to get very technical, it's the building owner. So what they do is they hire a building engineer. So it would typically be a building engineer. And so when I say it's a mixed bag, yes, there are some guys that know it very well. But then there is a lot of other guys who say, I know enough. And when I have a problem, I call you.
Yeah. Right.
And generally, a building engineer is going to fall, and that's not knock on the individual, but very demanding job, and in a lot of cases, you just need to recognize when you got to hire a vendor, but they would have to know about controls, building automation. They would have to have some sort of experience. I've seen some guys that have a stronger mechanical background, but then some sort of some of the networking and some of sort of the programming and the controls, maybe you're not that familiar. So you don't really know. So that would be, I mean, if a building owner, probably if they had a program to train their building engineers to make sure, okay, we have to maintain this network at a strong quality, and then we have to make sure that the data is recorded and we have to look at the data. And, if you start reading temperature that, it's 70 for 6 months and then one day it's 150, then, that immediately tells me that there's something wrong with that sensor or the wire got cut. So once you have that break, how quick can you recognize when something that was working at the time of commission now is no longer working? Because if you were to sit and, just let a sensor give you wrong data for a month or two, then that starts to make it a little bit more of a complex prediction if you had that.
How do you communicate those sorts of things? Like specifically, how would you communicate sort of network health to a facilities director or, like you said, a building owner who either doesn't have the technical background or just generally doesn't have the interest in getting to that granular level of sort of packet level diagnostics? How do you communicate to them what good looks like in terms of the network health? How would you go about showing them that?
So when I'm on site, I do show them. And when I see things offline, I mention it right away. But I don't think that there is enough emphasis on exactly that, during a process of turnover.
Yeah.
Whenever let's say we finish a job, it was commissioned, we'll have a owner's training. And it's usually an if it's even a full 8-hour day, it's usually slotted to be an 8-hour day. You got a lot of, you got a bunch of people walking around with hard hats on looking at stuff. And then, we have the controls where it's like, okay, here's your login, here's what the front page of the graphics look like. Here's your air handler. Here's some of the graphics. It's pretty generic, honestly. It's not enough, is what it is.
Right. I know that we use like with Optigo VN, we use a network health score, and Saheel with PingCx, they also have sort of an analog is one single score. And I know from our end, we've found that sort of solution helpful where, it's for people like the facilities directors or building owners who perhaps don't understand what a packet is or what the lines inside a packet are, but they can understand a red number that says 30 out of 100.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's more effective than, me as being a field guy, setting up a system, commissioning it. And then, I'm probably booked to be at a different job the next day. It's like I get out there and it's okay, let me just, try to, just blaze past this as quick as possible and get out of here. It's usually one of those type scenarios. When I first got into controls, my first control company, what they did they would do that per contract because you have to. But then they would actually sell a different training, and so it would be like a week long where they would get together 8 or 10 different building owners or building engineers, and then they would actually have a week. So they would give 40 hours of training to get more involved.
I have two questions left. And again, these are not necessarily related, but are there differences in how you approach long-term OT network health in, say, a hospital versus like a university campus or even a commercial tower? Or do you find the fundamentals are generally the same when it comes to just a healthy network?
Personally, don't. I think the fundamentals are the same. You have to stress the importance of it. Just because it's in a hospital, is this a critical area? There is a lot that goes into the hospitals on sort of the equipment operations.
But the fundamentals between all of those.
But the fundamentals is, your network needs to be strong, and it needs to stay that way.
And my final question here, what role does network documentation play in long-term health? And how often do you find that documentation is either missing, wrong, or was just never updated after initial commissioning? Both Ping and Saheel's answer was all the time. 100%
I was literally about that. Those 3 words were about to come out of my mouth all the time, every single time. Like if I go to a place, let's say it's a service call and I've never been there. And if I show up and there is documentation, I would be like, why'd you call me? Like, cause you probably had like what happened to the other guy? Did he retire? Yeah. Hopefully my app that I've built will help with some of that where guys retire.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that for a second about your app?
Yeah. So it's, it's a commissioning app. So if some people are familiar with, Facility Grid, CX Alloy. But the difference is, I think those guys they built it from the top down. So I've built my app from basically my perspective. When I'm doing startup, I've had a lot of different things, and you have to basically stop to record all the information. You have to do this manually. So there is a huge time sink. Some guys have said, once you have all your templates, it's not that much of a stretch, but I mean, every building is different. So you have to go in and you have to say, okay, well, eliminate these points here because they don't exist. Add these points here because they're unique to this unit. So there's still a bit of manual process just starting to create the site. What I'm doing is just using an API as an extractor. So I will upload a submittal in the app. You just upload a submittal and it'll say, building A, building B, whatever you upload. So it creates all the equipment. And then turn, per equipment, you're just taking that submittal. Okay, here's my points. Here's my points list. all right, here we go. Now we can do point to point. And then I've also implemented some sequence of operations where maybe some of the junior techs or some other people, maybe they don't know how something's supposed to work. Well,
Sure.
so my process is point to point, make sure everything is reading accurately. And so you're cross-referencing what you read on your app or your Jace, and then I'm looking at it and saying, okay, I have a meter in my hand. That temperature is actually 72, or this voltage is this. So I am ensuring that absolutely no questions that this number that I am reporting is true to the world. And then the next part of the flow is, you want to see the programs operated. I see a lot of guys still go in and say, okay, I overrode the damper to be 100% open. We're all set. Well, that's not quite how you commission something. You want to simulate all environments, So I put a toggle into it to say, this is how it's supposed to work. And if you follow this step, like a step by step, I mean, somebody that doesn't even know anything, if they follow right there, then it's going to be accurate.
So and I think that's really important right now. I think that's an important thing you touched on, because you're bridging that knowledge transfer. Like you said, this allowed a junior person who maybe had not done this before, or maybe this is their first time out alone on a job. And having this sort of stuff sounds invaluable.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice feature. And I actually made it a toggle. So if you're a pro and you know everything, you don't need to see that. Turn it off. I put links to all of the codes for all of the trades. So in the next page. So, but I did put them in there so that it tells you exactly what code for whatever you're looking at.
So Matt, where can people find this?
It's
is it still? Sorry, go ahead.
It's on my on my website. It's checkpoint.
checkpoint-cx.com.
So that's where you can find the app. It'll, like I said, I think before we started recording, I do need to work on the landing page a little bit and add a little bit more. But the app itself is totally up and running.
Great. Yeah. I just want to make sure we share it. I want to share it on the podcast. So if people are interested in what you're doing, they can find you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that would definitely be amazing. I think it's some really cool features that are in there that,
and you have a picture of the Toronto skyline in the back.
Yeah, it's it was a cool looking city. So
it's a cool looking city. As a former Torontonian, I can agree. It's a cool looking city.
To follow it up, at the very end, let's say you fully commission a site. I actually did implement an energy report, some of those other earlier things that we were talking about with the preventive maintenance. And so
great.
I'm saying, okay, upload the trends, throw the trends in there into the app, and it's going to say, okay, maybe the system isn't optimal. Here are some things that we can change to make it optimal. But it's more so, here is the proof that your system was not only fully commissioned 100%, but it is running optimally. So my thing is kind of an all-in-one from start to finish. Here, your system is working beautifully. You just saved yourself $20,000 and the work paid for itself.
Beautiful. So, yeah, that's great. You'll have to bring a prototype back to give us a demo when that gets up and working.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, amazing. All right. I think that's all the questions I have, Matthew. Thank you for taking the time to come back and help fill in some of these questions. And thank you for joining us for this conversation, and totally hope to have you back.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Just reach out anytime and we'll see what the availability is.
Thanks for joining us on How to Handshake. How to Handshake was created by Optigo Networks. You can find us on YouTube and at optigo.net. Tune in 2 weeks for the next episode.